Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 367 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 5 of The Orb Warmer. And here we go. Sure, Susan said, but she really wasn't sure. There were a lot of reasons why no one had ever read her works, and not knowing people in publishing wasn't even one of them. She stood up, stretching as an excuse. Mind if I get some air? She asked. Not a problem, Melissa said. Susan wandered out of the little building and off the porch. She saw a round stone by her foot. Without thinking, or exactly knowing why she did it, she picked it up. It felt good in her hand. A souvenir of the day, Susan said, and put it in her pocket. Melissa had noticed her picking up the random rock, and Susan had felt pressure to give some kind of explanation. Melissa apparently accepted this because she said nothing further, and they wandered up and down the fence line a bit, hearing the corn squeak as it grew. They say that corn even made sound growing the old-fashioned way, Melissa said. But I'll bet it wasn't as loud as this. I'll bet not, Susan said. The sound wasn't exactly ear-splitting, but it was surprisingly robust. The green corn stalks were going up nearly fast enough to see. She thought about her writing and Melissa reading it. All of my stuff is handwritten, she said. What's the best way to get it to you? Melissa thought. I'll have it picked up, she said. I'll get some at a time. That way I won't feel overwhelmed. How about we set it up so that I get it in a couple of days? That way you can figure out what you want to give to me. Okay, Susan said. She was a little disappointed Melissa wouldn't be taking it herself. She realized that her pants pocket was warm from the stone in it, which had been in the sun. They said their goodbyes, and Susan was again driven by the silent driver, whom Susan had given up on learning his name. The rock was still warm in her pocket. She assumed it was because it was tight in the pocket and pushing against her thigh. When she got home, she thanked the driver, who grunted a farewell, and went up to her house. There was still time left in the workday, but Susan was sure that her most of a day off had been taken care of. That was just something that happened around mages. She was home fairly early. She went to her room, took the stone out of her pocket, and put it on the old bureau. It was the only object on the bureau. Then she started to make an extra special dinner for her parents. She couldn't get the thought out of her head. A whole day's work for both of them would be used up in only a few seconds by Melissa or some other mage. The dinner went well. Susan decided not to tell her parents about Melissa again, and just pretended it was another normal day. When dinner was complete and she'd put everything away, Susan went to her room to write. But even before she sat down, her attention was drawn to the stone, sitting alone on her bureau. She went over to it again. She picked it up. It was still warm. That was strange. She'd made excuses for it before, but this was her room in their house. They didn't make enough money to keep the house warm in the winter. They were always wearing heavy clothes to keep comfortable. But it was the same temperature it had been when she'd first picked it up, and then when it was in her pocket. It was clearly warmer than the room. What was happening? She'd never heard of regular rocks being used as magic orbs. In fact, she'd always been told if anything other than the glass orbs were used to contain magic, that it was incredibly dangerous. But the stone didn't seem particularly dangerous. It was just a smooth, round, grayish stone, probably that had been in a riverbed in some age past. What would happen if she warmed it? Would it crack open? Would it explode? It was already warm. If this was indeed magic, as she was increasingly suspecting, would it get hot? Well, she thought, maybe we can try. She put on some even heavier clothes, including a scarf and a pair of goggles that she had gotten years ago when she was a teenager. She would need her hands free, or she would have put on gloves as well. She wasn't sure how much a scarf and goggles would actually protect her if the stone exploded, but she supposed it would depend on how powerful an explosion it would be. She sat at her small desk and put the stone on it. Then she laid her hands on it as though it were a glass orb at work. She didn't know how long it would take, or even what it would look like when it was done. Would it glow, or just turn hot? Assuming the heat was a partial orb warming, would it take the full hour, like at work, or a smaller amount of time? And what would she do with it when it was warmed? She decided she didn't care. If it got too hot to touch, she could put it in a pan in the oven or something. She focused and started the orb warming process. After only a couple of minutes, the heat seemed to rise. Strangely, it was becoming hotter, much hotter, yet it didn't seem to hurt her at all. It was a little like looking at a picture of the sun. It had some of the same characteristics, but it wouldn't hurt your eyes to look at it. This was the same way. There was clearly energy there, but she wasn't being burned. After only 5 minutes, it actually did start to glow. Not quite like the orbs did with their cool, bright light, but like a piece of metal glows, orange-red from heat pulsing within it. It didn't affect her wooden desktop either. Still, she stopped after those 5 minutes. Strange, but she felt like the stone was holding all the energy that one of the glass orbs usually held, but at 1/12 of the time it took. She wondered if it would hold this magic. Glass orbs held the magic quite well, one reason why they were so useful, or so she'd always been told. Perhaps this stone would drain its magic like an old battery. She tried touching the stone to various objects in her room, her pillow, the wall, the floor, the doorknob. It didn't heat up or harm anything, but kept glowing in the same orange glow. She put the stone in the top drawer of her bureau. Then, after checking on it several times, all of which showed it to be unchanging, she went to bed. And that's the end of the story for this week. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words of Music copyright 2024, Brandon Starr, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.